Zaina stood at the edge of the riverbank, her bare feet sinking into the soft, sun-warmed soil as she watched the water ripple under the golden evening light. The river was her sanctuary, a place where she could escape, even if only in her mind. The village bustled behind her, filled with the sounds of pounding grain, children's laughter, and the rhythmic beats of drums that signaled the start of another evening. Smoke curled into the sky from the many huts, carrying the rich aroma of roasting maize and spiced meat. Yet, despite the warmth of her surroundings, Zaina felt a deep, unshakable sadness settling in her chest. She had never felt like she truly belonged here. Not since her mother died. Her mother had been her protector, the only person who had ever truly loved her. But fate had been cruel, snatching her away with an illness that no healer could cure. In her absence, Musa, the man who had once sworn to love and care for her mother, had revealed his true colors. He was not a father to her, only a man who saw her as a burden, an obstacle, and more importantly, an asset to be used when the time was right. Musa was respected in the village, though not because of his kindness or wisdom, but because of his cunning. He was a man who knew how to manipulate people, how to make himself seem more powerful than he was. He owned vast farmlands, not through honest work, but through the debts he collected from desperate villagers. He was feared, and that fear gave him power. Zaina had learned from a young age that defying him brought nothing but suffering. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, she turned her gaze toward the heart of the village, where the elders gathered under the ancient baobab tree to discuss important matters. That was where true power lay, in the wisdom of the ancestors, in the traditions that had guided their people for generations. And yet, it was also a place where men like Musa thrived, using those same traditions to justify their actions. Zaina's heart ached for something more. She dreamed of a world beyond the boundaries of her village, of a life where she was free to make her own choices. But for a woman like her, freedom was an illusion. Her future had already been decided for her, whether she liked it or not. A gust of wind carried the scent of rain, and she shivered despite the warmth of the evening. Change was coming, she could feel it in her bones. She just didn't know if it would be for better or worse. As she turned back toward her hut, a single thought lingered in her mind: if she ever wanted to escape, she would have to find the strength within herself. But how could she fight against a man as powerful as Musa? The night would bring no answers, only the suffocating weight of uncertainty. The evening air was thick with the scent of burning firewood and simmering stew as Zaina walked back toward her hut, her thoughts tangled in the same web of longing and despair that had haunted her for years. She was tired of feeling powerless, tired of living under Musa's roof, where every day felt like another step toward an inevitable fate she could not escape. But nothing could have prepared her for the blow that awaited her inside. Musa sat on a carved wooden stool in the center of their dimly lit hut, a satisfied smirk stretched across his weathered face. The moment she entered, his eyes snapped to hers, sharp and filled with a cruel satisfaction that sent a shiver down her spine. Her instincts told her that whatever he was about to say would change her life forever. "I have good news," Musa said, his voice thick with self-importance. "You will be married by the end of the month." Zaina's heart stopped. For a moment, the crackling fire in the corner was the only sound in the room. The walls, woven from dried reeds, felt like they were closing in around her. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hands curled into fists at her sides. "No," she whispered, but Musa barely seemed to hear her. "It is already decided." "You should be grateful," he continued, leaning back, the flickering light casting deep shadows over his cruel features. "Chief Jabari has agreed to take you as his wife." Zaina's stomach twisted in horror. Chief Jabari? The old man who sat in the council with the elders, whose eyes always lingered too long on the young women of the village. He was powerful, yes, but he was at least 3 times her age. His wealth and influence made him untouchable, and now, somehow, Musa had convinced him to take her as his wife. "No," she said again, this time louder, stronger. She shook her head, taking a step back as if she could physically escape the words that hung between them. "I won't do it." Musa's smirk vanished in an instant. His expression darkened, and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You will." Zaina swallowed hard, fighting the burning tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. If you refuse, Musa continued, his voice calm but laced with menace, then you can leave. But you will leave with nothing. No food. No shelter. You will wander like a stray dog, begging for scraps. He leaned forward, his gaze pinning her to the spot. Tell me, where will you go? Who will take you in? Zaina wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But the truth was, he was right. Alone, she would not survive. That night, she fled to the only place she knew she could find solace, the riverbank. Amina was already there, waiting for her. Amina had been her friend since childhood, the only person who truly understood her. She had been watching Zaina closely all day, sensing the storm that was brewing, and when Zaina had sent her a frantic whisper through one of the village children, she had come running. What happened? Amina asked, her voice breathless with worry. Zaina could barely get the words out. Musa is forcing me to marry Chief Jabari. Amina sucked in a sharp breath. No. No, Zaina, this can't happen. You can't let it. Zaina let out a bitter laugh. And what choice do I have? If I refuse, he'll throw me out. I'll have nothing. Amina's eyes flashed with fury. Then run. Leave before it's too late. To where? Zaina asked, her voice hollow. What happens to women like me, Amina? The ones with no father, no dowry, no protection? Amina was silent. She knew the answer as well as Zaina did. Women who refused arranged marriages became outcasts, wandering the land as beggars or worse. Maybe, Amina hesitated, as if she didn't want to say the words. Maybe Chief Jabari won't be as bad as you think. Zaina stared at her friend in disbelief. You want me to marry him? No. Amina quickly shook her head. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you. Tears spilled over Zaina's cheeks, and Amina pulled her into a tight embrace. We'll think of something, she whispered. We have to. But as the days passed, it became clear that there was no way out. The village was already whispering about the upcoming wedding. Some pitied her, murmuring about how unfair it was that a young girl like her would be forced into such a fate. Others were envious, praising Musa for securing such a wealthy husband for his stepdaughter. To them, it was an honor, a sign that she was moving up in the world. Musa ignored her protests, moving forward with the wedding preparations as if she were nothing more than livestock to be sold. The hut was filled with brightly woven fabrics for her bridal attire, baskets of cowrie shells, and jars of scented oils. Each day, Zaina felt herself slipping further into despair. The night before the wedding, she sat alone, staring at the moonlit sky, praying for a miracle. A way out. A sign. Anything. Little did she know, the storm that would change everything was already on its way. The day before the wedding dawned with a deceptive beauty, the sky painted in shades of gold and crimson, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating the union that Zaina dreaded with every fiber of her being. The village buzzed with excitement, women weaving intricate patterns into baskets meant for her new home, while others pounded millet and prepared the feast that would mark the occasion. Children ran through the narrow paths between huts, singing songs of joy, their innocent voices oblivious to the sorrow that clung to Zaina's heart. She sat motionless as the village women adorned her in a magnificent gown, its deep crimson fabric embroidered with gold thread that shimmered under the flickering firelight. Heavy beads, carved from ivory and polished to perfection, were draped around her neck, while cowrie shells were woven into her long, dark braids. The scent of shea butter and exotic oils filled the hut as they rubbed her skin with fragrant pastes, their hands working with care and reverence. You are the luckiest girl in the village, one of the women murmured, adjusting the golden bangles on Zaina's wrists. Another woman, her eyes filled with envy, whispered, to marry a man as powerful as Chief Jabari. What a blessing. Zaina remained silent. A blessing? This was a curse, a prison disguised in gold and silk. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the weight of Musa's threats and the helpless reality of her situation kept her rooted to the ground. She had no choice. Whether she liked it or not, by this time tomorrow, she would belong to Chief Jabari. As soon as the women finished their work, she slipped away, making her way toward the outskirts of the village where her mother's grave lay beneath the shade of an old baobab tree. The wind carried the whispers of rustling leaves, the branches swaying as if in mourning. She knelt before the mound of earth, tracing the outline of the simple stone marker with trembling fingers. "Mother," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do." Tears spilled down her cheeks, dampening the dry earth beneath her. "They are taking me away, forcing me into a life I don't want. I wish you were here. You would have protected me." A gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and something else, something ancient. It was as if the earth itself had heard her cries. She closed her eyes and prayed. For a sign. For a way out. For something, anything, that would save her from the fate awaiting her. As she sat in silence, the sounds of the village seemed distant, like an echo from another world. But then, she heard it, a murmur, hushed whispers carried by the wind. Rumors. Chief Jabari was a man of immense wealth, but no one truly knew how he had acquired it. Some claimed he had made a pact with the spirits of the forest, exchanging something precious for power. Others whispered of his past wives, young women who had disappeared without a trace. Zaina's heart pounded. Could it be true? Or were these merely stories spun from jealousy and fear? That evening, as the preparations continued and the village celebrated what they believed to be a joyous occasion, an old village elder beckoned her aside. He was a frail man, his back bent with age, but his eyes still held the sharpness of someone who had seen more than he should. "Child," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know the man you are marrying?" Zaina's breath caught in her throat. "He is the chief," she answered cautiously. "A powerful man." The elder shook his head. "Powerful, yes. But at what cost?" She shivered as he leaned closer. "Your fate is not what it seems," he warned. "Listen to the spirits. They are trying to tell you something." Zaina wanted to ask more, but before she could, Musa's voice rang out, calling for her. The elder pressed a small bundle into her hands, a string of black beads, their surface cool against her palm. "Keep this with you," he murmured. "And when the time comes, trust your heart." That night, as the village celebrated, Zaina sat alone in her hut, clutching the beads tightly. Something was not right. And she feared she would soon find out exactly what it was. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky painted in brilliant hues of orange and red, as if the heavens themselves were ablaze. The village was alive with excitement, the air thick with the sound of beating drums, ululations from the women, and the rich aroma of food being prepared for the grand feast. Zaina, however, felt none of the joy that surrounded her. She sat in the center of her hut, staring at her reflection in the polished bronze mirror propped against the wall. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, her face painted with intricate patterns of red and white clay, her eyes lined with kohl, her lips stained deep crimson. The elaborate wedding attire she wore, layers of embroidered silk, golden bangles, and an ornate headdress, made her look like a queen. But beneath the shimmering fabrics and jewels, she felt like a prisoner. Musa entered the hut, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice heavy with pride. "A true chief's wife." Zaina clenched her fists beneath the folds of her gown. She refused to meet his gaze. Musa, unbothered by her silence, continued, "Today, you bring honor to this family. Do not shame me with your foolishness." With that, he turned and left, leaving her alone with the crushing weight of her fate. The drums outside signaled that it was time. The women of the village arrived to escort her, singing traditional wedding songs as they led her through the village toward Chief Jabari's grand hut. The path was lined with villagers, their faces filled with awe and admiration. Some whispered about her beauty, others about how lucky she was to be chosen by the chief. But Zaina heard another kind of whispering too. The same murmurs she had heard the night before. "They say his past wives disappeared. No one knows where his wealth comes from. There's something unnatural about him. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept walking, her steps measured and graceful, her face a mask of forced serenity. Chief Jabari stood at the front of his grand hut, adorned in a flowing robe of deep indigo, a heavy golden staff in his hand. His face, lined with age, carried a smile that did not reach his eyes. The elder presiding over the ceremony raised his hands, calling for silence. We gather here today to unite our great chief, Jabari, with the maiden Zaina, in a bond blessed by our ancestors. Zaina barely heard the words. Her mind raced, her pulse hammering in her ears. She felt suffocated, the weight of her destiny closing in around her. Just as the elder prepared to complete the vows, a voice rang out. "Stop!" Gasps rippled through the crowd as all heads turned toward the source of the voice. A young warrior, his frame tall and lean, stepped forward. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his braided hair adorned with small beads. A sword hung at his waist, and his eyes burned with determination. "I cannot allow this marriage to continue," he declared. Musa stormed forward, fury written across his face. "Who are you to interrupt this sacred ceremony?" The warrior's gaze never wavered. "My name is Malik, and I have come with the truth." A murmur spread through the crowd. Chief Jabari's smile tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You bring accusations on my wedding day, boy? Be careful of the words you speak." Malik took another step forward. "I do not speak lightly. I have traveled far to uncover the truth about you, Chief Jabari. And what I found is something this village must know." Zaina's breath caught in her throat. Jabari's eyes darkened. "Lies," he spat. "This is a ploy to humiliate me. Take this man away." But before anyone could move, Malik reached into the pouch at his waist and pulled out a bundle of old, tattered cloth. He unraveled it, revealing something that made the entire crowd gasp. It was a bracelet, one carved with the symbols of the River Tribe, a tribe that had mysteriously vanished years ago. "This belonged to one of your past wives," Malik said, his voice ringing with conviction. "A woman who was never seen again after you married her. And she is not the only one." The crowd erupted into chaos. Zaina's blood ran cold. The rumors, the whispers, they were true. Chief Jabari was hiding a dark past. And she had nearly become his next victim. A heavy silence settled over the village square, the only sound the distant crackling of torches and the restless shuffling of the crowd. The weight of Malik's words hung in the air like a curse, turning the joyous wedding into a moment of reckoning. Chief Jabari's face remained calm, but his grip on his golden staff tightened. "These are baseless accusations," he said, his voice measured, though a hint of anger lurked beneath his composed facade. "This is my wedding day, and you bring falsehoods to tarnish my name." But Malik was undeterred. He took another step forward, lifting the tattered bracelet higher for all to see. "You can deny this, but the truth cannot be hidden forever. The spirits of the past will not be silenced." Zaina, standing frozen beside the elder, felt her heart hammering in her chest. She had prayed for an escape from this marriage, but she had never imagined this. Malik turned to the crowd. "Let me tell you the story of the man you call your chief." A ripple of anticipation ran through the villagers. Even those who had once dismissed the rumors about Jabari were now listening intently. Malik inhaled deeply and began. "Many years ago, there was a powerful warlord named Kafula, feared across the land. He led raids on villages, stealing wealth, capturing innocents, and leaving destruction in his wake. But his greatest act of treachery came when he turned against his own people, the royal family that had once trusted him." Gasps erupted from the elders, while whispers spread like wildfire among the villagers. Malik's voice grew stronger. Kafula betrayed the king, stealing treasures from the palace and disappearing into the night. Many believed he had died, but the truth is, he changed his identity. He fled to distant lands, building a new life under a new name. That man now stands before you. All eyes turned to Chief Jabari. Jabari's expression darkened, his fingers flexing against the staff he held. "Enough of this madness," he thundered. I have been your leader for years. I have provided for this village, protected you, guided you. And you would believe the wild tales of a stranger? Malik did not back down. Then explain this. He gestured toward a group of young men standing at the edge of the gathering. At a signal, they emerged from the crowd, carrying an object wrapped in cloth. They laid it on the ground and slowly unraveled the fabric. A stunned silence fell over the square. It was an emblem, an ornate golden crest, adorned with the symbols of the lost kingdom. One of the village elders gasped, stepping forward to inspect the relic. His fingers trembled as he traced the intricate carvings. This is the royal seal of the great King Abadil, he whispered. The seal that was stolen decades ago, along with the kingdom's most sacred treasures. Zaina's breath hitched. The truth was undeniable now. Jabari took a step back, his jaw clenched. This means nothing, he said, though his voice lacked its usual authority. But Malik was not finished. That emblem was found in your hut, Chief Jabari. The villagers erupted into shocked murmurs, their eyes darting toward their leader with suspicion and fear. The elders exchanged glances, their expressions grave. The truth had been hidden for too long, but now, it could no longer be ignored. Musa, who had remained silent until now, suddenly grabbed Malik by the arm. You are ruining everything, he hissed. Do you realize what you've done? You have shamed my family. But Malik merely pulled away. I have revealed the truth. And the truth will set this village free. The elder raised his hands for silence. Chief Jabari, do you deny these claims? Jabari opened his mouth, but for the first time, he found no words. His long-kept secrets were unraveling before his eyes. The village had turned against him. And there was no escaping the past now. Musa's face contorted with rage as he stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger at Malik. This is nothing but a lie. A scheme to humiliate our great chief. His voice rang out across the gathering, but it no longer carried the same authority it once did. The villagers, who had once respected Musa as an elder, now looked at him with suspicion. Their faith in Chief Jabari had already crumbled, and now, their eyes turned toward the man who had pushed Zaina into this doomed marriage. One of the elders, a woman named Naima, stepped forward, her wrinkled hands gripping her staff. Musa, answer this, why were you so desperate to see this marriage happen? Musa hesitated, but then forced a laugh. Zaina is my daughter. I was only looking out for her future. Malik, still standing tall, shook his head. No. You were looking out for yourself. The villagers murmured in agreement. Another elder spoke, his voice grave. You arranged this marriage for wealth, didn't you? Musa clenched his fists. I did what any father would do. I secured a future for my household. Your household, an older woman in the crowd interrupted. Not Zaina's. The words hit hard. Zaina, who had remained quiet throughout the ordeal, finally stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in her words. You never did this for me, Musa. You sold me. Like an object. Like a piece of cattle. Musa's lips pressed into a thin line. I raised you. I fed you. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating me before the whole village? Zaina lifted her chin. You were never my father. My mother was barely gone before you turned our home into a place of greed and selfishness. You only cared about what I could bring you. The crowd murmured louder, the realization settling in. A man from the crowd spoke, shaking his head. All these years, we believed Musa was a respectable man, but look at the truth before us. He was willing to sacrifice his own stepdaughter for gold and status. Another villager added, and he expected us to celebrate it. Musa turned to them, his eyes wild. You are all fools. Without men like me, this village would have nothing. I made a deal to ensure prosperity. But no one was listening anymore. The elders exchanged knowing looks before Naima turned to him. Musa, you have brought disgrace upon this village. A younger man stepped forward. You must leave. Musa's eyes widened. What? You would cast me out? After all I've done? But the crowd had spoken. The whispers of agreement turned into loud declarations. The people of the village would no longer accept his greed and deception. Musa took a step back, sweat forming at his brow. He turned to Chief Jabari, but the disgraced leader could offer him no protection now. The village had already rejected him. Realizing he had no choice, Musa let out a frustrated growl and turned on his heel. He stormed away, pushing through the crowd as they parted to let him go. The weight of his disgrace clung to him like a shadow. As he disappeared into the distance, a strange silence settled over the village. Zaina stood in the center of it all, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. But as the weight of her stepfather's tyranny lifted, a new uncertainty took its place. What would she do now? As the dust settled from Musa's disgraceful departure, the villagers turned to Malik, their expressions shifting from anger to curiosity. Who was this man who had unmasked Jabari's dark past and stood so fearlessly against corruption? Zaina, still reeling from the whirlwind of revelations, took a step closer. Malik, you never told us who you truly are. Malik's expression softened. He exhaled slowly, as if carrying the weight of years on his shoulders. It is time you all knew the truth, he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. The villagers gathered tightly, eager for his words. Even the elders, wise and cautious, watched him with careful eyes. Malik turned to them. I was not always just a traveler. I was born into a family of honor, into a kingdom that once thrived beyond the great rivers. A hush fell over the crowd. My true name is Malik Abadil, he continued. I am the son of King Abadil, the rightful ruler of the land beyond the western hills. Gasps erupted. Some villagers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. The name was known to the elders, stories of a fallen kingdom, a family forced into exile, a prince lost to time. Elder Naima, who had remained silent, finally spoke. The kingdom of Abadil, was it not said that treachery brought it to ruin? Malik nodded. Yes. And the man responsible for it was none other than Chief Jabari, once known as the warlord Kafula. The weight of his words sank into the crowd. My father ruled with wisdom and justice, Malik continued. But Jabari, Kafula, betrayed him, stealing treasures, spreading lies, and turning our allies against us. My family was forced to flee. My father, he did not survive the betrayal. Malik's voice wavered slightly, but he straightened his shoulders. For years, I wandered, searching for the truth, gathering evidence. I vowed to reclaim my honor and expose the man who destroyed my family's legacy. Zaina's heart ached for him. To have lost everything, to live in exile, only to return and face the very man responsible, Malik had carried a burden far greater than anyone had imagined. One of the elders stepped forward, a deep frown on his face. And how do we know this to be true? Malik reached into his cloak and retrieved a small, worn object wrapped in cloth. Slowly, he unraveled it, revealing a pendant, an intricate piece of gold, engraved with the royal emblem of the Abadil dynasty. Gasps filled the air once more. Elder Naima reached for it, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. Her eyes glistened with recognition. This is the royal crest of King Abadil. Another elder, an elderly man named Kofi, nodded gravely. It is true. I was a boy when I last saw this symbol, but I remember the stories well. He turned to Malik, his expression unreadable. You are indeed the lost prince. The realization spread among the villagers like wildfire. A young man stepped forward hesitantly. If you are royalty, then what will you do now? Malik hesitated. I did not come to reclaim a throne. I came to restore justice, to honor my father's name. He turned to the elders. I do not wish to rule over anyone. I only seek to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Elder Naima studied him for a long moment before speaking. Your journey has been long, Malik. But you have proven your strength, your wisdom, and your honor. We would be honored to have you among us. The other elders nodded in agreement. You are welcome here, Elder Kofi added. And we would like you to take a place in our council. A man of truth and justice is always needed. The villagers cheered. For the first time in years, Malik felt something he had not allowed himself to feel: peace. He had spent so long chasing justice that he had never stopped to consider what came after. As the people welcomed him, Zaina met his gaze. A silent understanding passed between them. His journey was not over. And neither was hers. As the village settled into an uneasy calm, the weight of the past lifted, leaving behind the promise of something new. The air was no longer thick with fear or silent obedience. There was a shift, a quiet hope that had not existed before. Zaina stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as the elders spoke to Malik, offering him a place among them. The villagers, once hesitant, now regarded him with admiration and respect. He had uncovered the truth, not just about Jabari, but about himself. And now, she had to do the same. For the first time in years, she was free. No one controlled her fate anymore. There was no stepfather to dictate her choices, no forced marriage to chain her to a life she never wanted. She could breathe, truly breathe, without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on her. Amina appeared at her side, squeezing her hand. You did it, she whispered. You're free, Zaina. Free. The word felt strange, unfamiliar. She had spent so long dreaming of escape, but now that she had it, she wasn't sure what to do next. Where would she go? What kind of life would she make for herself? Malik approached, his gaze steady, filled with something she couldn't quite name: admiration, perhaps, or understanding. You're stronger than you know, Zaina, he said. You stood against those who tried to break you, and you never lost yourself. She smiled faintly. I wasn't sure I would make it through. But you did, he said. And now, the future is yours to decide. Zaina looked out over the village, the home she had known all her life. It had once felt like a prison, but now, it was simply a place, one she could choose to leave or stay in. Malik hesitated, then spoke again. The royal court is being rebuilt. It will take time, but I will need strong, wise people by my side. People like you. Zaina's heart skipped a beat. You're asking me to come with you? I'm offering you a choice, he said gently. Not as a duty, not as an obligation. But because I believe you could help build something better. A future where no one else will have to endure what you did. A future where no girl would be sold for a man's greed. Where no village would suffer under corrupt rule. A future she could shape with her own hands. For the first time in her life, Zaina was the one making the decision. She took a deep breath, the realization settling in. She had spent so long waiting for someone to rescue her, but in the end, she had saved herself. And now, she was stepping into a new life, not as someone's daughter, not as someone's bride, but as her own person. I'll go, she said finally, her voice strong. Not because I need to, but because I choose to. Malik smiled. Amina threw her arms around her. I knew you were meant for more, she whispered. Zaina turned toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set in brilliant streaks of orange and gold. It felt like an ending, but more than that, it felt like a beginning. She was no longer running from fate. She was walking toward it, on her own terms.